Everybody has their own agenda. My point of view, I want games to take over the world. That's my agenda. I think games are the most powerful, most important medium ever created by man. The merging of entertainment and software together to make something unstoppable. Today, when the game business is a $140 billion business worldwide, bigger than music, bigger than movies, bigger than TV, it's obvious. It wasn't obvious 40 years ago that this was going to happen.
The creation of Xbox isn't about a single memo or single idea. When you get a group of motivated, smart people together, burning the midnight oil in the face of all sorts of odds to make the impossible possible, you can't do better than that.
It wasn't enough for us to be successful in the marketplace. We wanted people to love us. And we wanted the industry to look at Xbox as something that was going to be worthy of the very best games.
I was always feeling that I was on a journey with real-time pressure to find a place where I would fit in. You hear Miyamoto talk about when he was a kid exploring in the forest behind his house, and he wanted to make games like that. He wanted to make that place. We created a device that enabled people to make environments and places where people like us could feel that safety, where people like us felt we belonged. And that's an awesome achievement of a generation. We made that place. How cool is that?
We were on a journey to try to influence and get support for this crazy idea that we had around putting a DirectX-powered box in the living room to deliver Microsoft-powered interactive content.
And the very beginnings of Xbox, when it was still called the DirectX box, for the first 6 months or so, it's about various groups of us driving around trying to crash meetings and get traction on this thing.
Horace was horrified when he got the plans from engineering. It was this big rectangular board, and he's like, I'm supposed to design a console around this? What am I supposed to do with this?
I remember the guys coming to me in the evening with this big motherboard from the 90s. The PC motherboard from the 90s was this gigantic board that had all these PCI slots on it. And I still remember the big graphic card that they brought over also as well and said, put this into something that is presentable on stage. And I still remember staring at it going, what now? What do I do with this thing? And I thought, we gotta make it cool, we gotta make it super exciting. People gotta be able to tell in an instant that this thing is called Xbox.
What we were proposing would introduce a true wild card into Microsoft's entire business and its perception and its place in the industry. And that caused some fear and trepidation.
The more passionate that the five of us are, the scarier it is to people who are senior. Up to a point. As you go up through middle management, people who've done very well at Microsoft for a decade or so, who've become senior, it's scary to them to see people who are going to mix things up. The only people who really got excited about it were the people who had operated the same way we were, but in 1980, the beginning of Microsoft, who had been saying things like, we can have the operating system and that'll control everything. They were passionate about it and they did it. They loved hearing about the way we were doing things. And fortunately for us, Bill was a part of that. So Bill could tolerate us in a way that the guys who worked just under Bill probably just dreaded having meetings with us.
It didn't fit into their worldview, it didn't fit into their idea of what Microsoft was.
Microsoft at this time, you could tell just driving into the office. You'd be driving in and three guys would pull in front of you in new Porsches and cut you off.
Everybody had to have a Ferrari and they had to take 2 parking places.
And it was because those guys had been there for 10 years and managed not to be fired. So they were millionaires. And this was the face of the people that we were trying to interface with, and it was depressing.
We were an annoyance that some of these people just didn't need or didn't feel they had time for.
I still remember the guys coming over the first night. Seamus, Otto, Ted, and Kevin came and said, we have this idea to build a game console. And then they literally dropped this board and dropped these components on the table and said, what would it be like if we did this and this and this? And can you sketch it for us? Can you help us kind of put the pen on paper? And I remember, all I had was a green marker. All my other markers were all dried up at the time. I sketched things in black and green, and ultimately that stuck, and everybody fell in love with it.
Horace designed, he's like, dude, we need a metal X, and it's got to have a green eye, shooting a laser out. I want it to blind people.
The idea was that there was this technology inside this big aluminum box that was busting at the seam, almost like a nuclear reactor. So when you look through this portal, you see this intense energy that's inside. And we try to recreate that with, we shopped around for a whole bunch of green laser pens at the time, trying to make the light just this intense thing that will shoot across the stage and trying to make this thing as cool as possible, as capable as possible.
Thank you, Bill. It just might appear that The Rock and Bill Gates don't have a heck of a lot in common. Well, The Rock's here to say that that can't be farther from the truth. The Xbox is everything The Rock is. Cutting edge, powerful, exhilarating. I mean, The Rock doesn't impress easily, Bill, you know that, but I'm pretty damn impressed with what we're seeing here today. And considering that this Xbox at this moment is only running on 1/5 of the system's power, it's very impressive. Bill, do you have any idea what The Rock would be like if he were only running on 1/5 of his power?
Well, I would think that...
It doesn't matter what you think, Bill. I'm sorry, Bill. It's just a force of habit. Rock apologizes.
Pre-internet, when a story would break, but it would take a little while for it to show up in print. So, unlike today's day and age where a story breaks within a matter of seconds.
You have to put yourself back in 1999 when newspapers and network television were super important, right?
Next Generation was a source for video game news on the industry side that a lot of the younger skewing game magazines who were publishing cheat codes and strategy guides, we weren't really doing that. We were more, covering games as an art form and sort of the business behind the games. So for us, it was really important to make sure that we knew what was happening in this space and what people were thinking about doing and how the needle was moving. So we were talking to people behind the scenes at all the game companies in a way that a lot of the other publications just weren't doing. And one day, one of my friends happened to stumble into one of those conversations. And he was like, "You'll never believe what I just heard."
First time I had an inkling that Microsoft was doing a console was when Tom Russo looks across the desk and gets off the phone with somebody. He looks across the desk at me.
It was a big deal. So I'm like, Chris Charla, who was the editor-in-chief of the magazine. I was the news editor.
He's like, "Charla, Microsoft's making a game console." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, I just got off the phone with my source."
I protect my source here.
And Microsoft's making a game console. And I was like, "How do you know?" He's like, "He was standing at the fax machine. He faxed back the NDA, and then he called me from the fax machine phone so nobody in the office would know that he called."
There were definitely some leaky employees on the team, and I always was trying to figure out where the leaks were coming from. I have my suspicions who they were.
We knew what we had was gold. It was a very Woodward and Bernstein. We started filling in the pieces and then trying to do some follow-up together.
I remember Next Generation magazine called that hotline, and I answered that call, and I didn't comment on it.
We had talked to Microsoft. They had given us a firm no comment.
Hang up the phone, race downstairs where the engineering team was, and say, "Oh my gosh, you guys, I think they're onto us."
Video game magazines don't break news. Like we can't shout "stop the presses," but we were like just about to go to press. So I just looked over at Mike Wilmuth, who's our art director. I'm like, "Mike, hold up on the cover, hold up."
Dean Takahashi at the Wall Street Journal was sort of onto us as well.
I got this tip that Microsoft is working on a game console. I called Seamus about this. He said to me, "If anybody was working on something like that here at Microsoft, I bet I would know about it." And he was looking down on his desk at this prototype of the Xbox. And so he threw me off the scent.
We got to call Bacchus, and so I call up Kevin Bacchus. And he's like, "Chris, if we were doing a game console, I think I'd know about it."
So I called Seamus. "Hey, dude, I hear you're working on this Xbox thing. What's the deal? Can you tell me about it?" And he's super cool as a cucumber. He's like, He's like, no, man, I don't know what you're talking about. What's Xbox?
Hey, what are you talking about? I'm the program manager for entertainment graphics for Windows. I'm working on APIs for 3D FX video cards for Windows. Just lying to him.
Sometime later, after the official announcement, he's like, do you remember that time you called me? He goes, I was actually in a warehouse welding those X-Dev kits when you called.
While I got you on the phone, you know, like, this is off the record. I'm like, sure. And he's like, if we were making a console, what would you like to see in it? And I'm like, write it.
On March 13, 2001, Microsoft put their commitment to developers on public display at their GameStock event in Seattle.
Thanks and welcome to GameStock 2001. What you're seeing is a sneak peek at what's to come on Xbox. We're going to start off with a game whose vision was really just too big to fit in the PS2, so we brought it over to the Xbox.
Our characters certainly aren't the muscle-bound superheroes, you know, that we want to be. They're more like the poor, sad schmucks that most of us really are.
Dolphin was a real-time 3D rendered dolphin swimming around in water with ground terrain underneath it. And Dolphin was just enough to stress almost every part of the 3D pipeline of an early pre-release Xbox system. And if Dolphin doesn't work, it means something somewhere has failed. Either the software has regressed, maybe there's something wrong with the silicon, but having Dolphin not run was a sad thing to have happen.
Well, with the design, I'm really trying to communicate what the team is trying to promise to the marketplace. You know, the future gaming experience. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means a lot of different things, but one of the fundamental things it means is the raw and sensor power that the technology can promise. That now anything is possible inside the machine. You know, put your hand out in a natural posture. Imagine that you'll be holding it in that shape for 2 hours. I don't think that you'll go like this. You'll go like this in a natural posture. Well, this is where the controller fits in.
We worked with the city to open up the WWF restaurant across the street from Toys R Us Times Square. And that's where all the gamers came first.
Bill wanted to be on site. He wanted to help hand over the first console.
Everybody got a tag on their wrist, and when your color was called, we brought you across the street to Toys R Us, and Bill was there to hand out the very first Xbox.
Tonight's kind of a celebration. It's after a lot of hard work.
10, 9, 8, 7.
It was a magical night.
Xbox Live is really different from anything else that's been done before. You're connecting people across the world to play games. And everyone's trash talk when you're playing sports games. They're the most competitive things. Oh, I'm gonna get inside your head when you're calling your plays. People always want that top spot. They always want their name in lights.
Xbox Live Arcade, I think at the beginning, really was what became Xbox Live storefront now. The plan was they would release games that were small because bandwidth was hard to get at the time. It was a lot slower at the time. So you had to make a game. I remember the game had to be 20 megs. And 20 megs is unfathomable now, but like 20 megs size, so your game has to fit in that. And I remember like, okay, well, if that's gonna happen, we're gonna do these older games. So we did Robotron, Defender, Joust, Time Pilot, these classic arcade games. Those fit in 20 megs. And then Microsoft said, no, we're gonna raise the limit to 50 megs. So we started making more complicated games. And while we're in the middle of doing that, they're like, oh, you can do 100 now. And then over that time, they ended up letting it go up to like multiple gigs of size. But for the initial launch, the concept was arcade games because people don't have the infrastructure to receive larger games.
When Xbox Live Arcade was first coming on board, which was really on the original Xbox, it was like literally a disc product that you had to put in. I was working at an independent developer called Digital Eclipse, and we were contacted by Microsoft to start making games, arcade games for Xbox Live Arcade.
People wanted digital content, and they didn't want to have to go to the store to buy games, and that if they could download it, if they could download these smaller experiences that were just easily digestible in a digital format, like people wanted that, and that was this whole market that was untapped. And Xbox Live Arcade was the first to really prove that out.